You ever feel like you finally secured a moment of tranquility, only to have it abruptly shattered in the most absurd and unexpected manner imaginable? 5 years ago, I established my ideal residence on a sprawling 9-acre plot nestled in the Colorado Highlands, complete with all necessary certifications and official approvals. It was, in my estimation, flawless. Thus, you can perhaps envision my astonishment when the president of the Homeowners Association approached my doorstep, informing me that my dwelling was encroaching upon their territory. I initially dismissed it as preposterous, but then the survey team uncovered a far more significant issue. Her entire opulent estate, including its swimming pool, outdoor living space, and separate guest quarters, had been constructed directly on my property, and a court ruling ultimately granted me full reclamation. Upon concluding my tenure as a federal land inspector, I had genuinely believed the most demanding chapters of my life were behind me. I had spent 2 decades navigating the labyrinthine world of bureaucratic indecision, dealing with officials who struggled to comprehend property maps, encountering unscrupulous developers who feigned expertise, and facing surveyors who conveniently misplaced boundary markers whenever financial incentives were involved. Such experiences can certainly take their toll. Consequently, when I relinquished my badge, I resolved to dedicate my remaining years to a sanctuary where the only demarcations I would acknowledge were those sculpted by the majestic mountains and the gentle caress of the wind. That cherished location turned out to be a tract of approximately 20 acres of untamed Colorado mountainside, situated just beyond the periphery of Grand Junction. This land had once been part of a timber operation dating back to the 1970s. It's the kind of terrain where the very soil beneath your boots seems to whisper tales of ages past, and each towering pine appears to hold memories of more winters than you could ever recount. My acquisition of this property was far from impulsive. Indeed, I approached it with the meticulous diligence characteristic of a federal inspector. I deconstructed every aspect of the parcel on paper long before I set foot on it. Every corner stake, every directional shift, every alteration in the property line was meticulously recorded, dated, and notarized. I compiled elevation profiles, soil analyses, and a comprehensive review of historical surveys spanning 4 decades. I even initiated cross-referencing procedures through 2 distinct government agencies. When I assert that I ensured the deed was unequivocally clear, I mean it was pristine beyond reproach. The moment I finalized the purchase, I experienced a profound sense of peace I hadn't felt in decades. The genuine, soul-settling kind that loosens the burdens from your shoulders. Subsequently, I erected the dwelling I had been envisioning, sketching its design on countless bar napkins during those interminable government conferences since 1998. It featured 2 levels, exposed pine beams, a sweeping veranda spacious enough for 3 rocking chairs, and a dedicated workshop beneath for my cherished hobbies, complete with a dog-friendly den. An observation deck offered panoramic views of approaching storm systems from Utah, resembling slow-moving, gray freight trains. Most appealingly, it afforded complete solitude. No neighbors, no imposed regulations, no committees, only the profound silence of the hills and the soothing murmur of the wind weaving through the pines. In the early hours, I would often savor my initial cup of coffee in this serene setting, absorbing the quietude of the nascent day. Occasionally, a hawk would majestically traverse the valley, or a coyote would confidently stride along the ridge as if it were the rightful proprietor. My sole responsibility was to appreciate this natural splendor. For a considerable period, this was all I desired. A tranquil abode on steadfast ground, a vista that evolved with the passing seasons, an ample space separating me from any adjacent property line, allowing me to forget the very concept of contention. Honestly, I truly believed this idyllic existence would define the remainder of my days. However, adversity possesses an uncanny knack for manifesting precisely when one begins to feel secure from its reach. In my circumstance, trouble arrived concealed within a gleaming, platinum-hued luxury sport utility vehicle piloted by a woman whose oversized sunglasses seemed to dwarf her personality and who wielded a clipboard as if it were a royal scepter. Little did I know then, the peace I believed I had secured was on the precipice of transforming into the most significant territorial dispute of my entire professional history, and its commencement would not be within the hallowed halls of a courtroom, but rather at the very edge of my porch, confronting the very individual who would soon emerge as the most formidable homeowners association president I had ever encountered. My initial encounter with Karen Haslinger was akin to being surprised by a sudden, boisterous gust of wind on an otherwise calm day. Unexpected, intrusive, and carrying an unsettling chill. It was the cusp of summer, a warm morning bathed in the gentle sunlight gracing the ridge, the kind of day that evokes a sense of inherent honesty in the world. I was engrossed in securing a loose hinge on the workshop door when the distinct crunch of tires on gravel signaled an approaching vehicle. The pace was slow, deliberate, suggesting a rehearsed arrival. As I looked up, she was there, her platinum silver SUV polished to such a degree that it appeared almost averse to the dusty terrain. Emerging from the vehicle was a woman adorned with sunglasses, so large they could have served as makeshift riot shields, accompanied by a tiny, trembling canine that seemed unaccustomed to the outdoors. Her attire exuded an air of distinct detachment from any manual labor. She offered no greeting, no smile, not even a cursory glance at my home. Instead, her attention was directed to a document she held, then to me, and then back to the document, as if matching a suspect to a description. "Good morning," she announced in a tone excessively cheerful to inspire confidence. "I'm Karen Haslinger, president of the Blue Haven Ridge Homeowners Association." I met her gaze, took a slow sip of my coffee. "I'm not part of your HOA," I stated, my tone calm, friendly, and informative. Her smile remained unwavering. "Oh, I'm aware. But sometimes, community standards extend beyond formal membership. We are all neighbors here." I presumed that was the conclusion of the matter. An unconventional introduction, certainly, but individuals with an abundance of leisure time and a penchant for strict regulations often seek to project an aura of importance. I assumed she was merely extending a perfunctory welcome. However, she turned, retrieved a gold-embossed envelope from her vehicle, and presented it between her fingers as though it were an award. She then placed it on the corner of my porch railing, remarking, "A small note regarding your garage door." That marked the genesis of the first correspondence and the prelude to all that was to follow. That evening, I unsealed the envelope at my kitchen table. The letter, impeccably typed and watermarked, bore the formality of a wedding invitation. Its message was concise. "Your garage door color does not adhere to the visual harmony standards of the Blue Haven Ridge community. Please, repaint within 14 days. I read it twice, then erupted in laughter so heartily that I nearly overturned my drink. My property was situated 300 feet beyond their stipulated boundary, and my land predated their development. My deed contained no stipulations regarding visual harmony, and I certainly had not entered into any agreement that necessitated the approval of a woman wielding a clipboard and a dog the size of a lunchbox. The letter was promptly consigned to the fireplace. Yet, as the elders wisely counsel, a single letter might be an error, 2 indicate a pattern, and 3 signify a genuine problem. A week later, another envelope materialized, this time slipped discreetly beneath the workshop door. "Fence height exceeds community uniformity guidelines." Uniformity for a community to which I did not belong. Into the flames it went. Then arrived the third communication. "Your tool shed is visible from certain rear-facing windows of nearby community residences. Please conceal or relocate." Another fiery fate. Subsequently, the fourth missive arrived, a complaint regarding my gravel driveway being aesthetically disruptive during the early morning sunrise hours. It too met its demise in the fire. However, with each subsequent letter, the tone grew more elaborate, the language more formal, and somewhere between the grievances concerning my porch lighting and the gradient of my land, her demeanor shifted. She ceased writing as a concerned neighbor and began to adopt the posture of someone meticulously compiling a case file. One can often discern the imminent arrival of trouble particularly when one has spent 2 decades contending with individuals adept at contorting the truth until it buckles. Karen was not merely inconvenienced, she was actively constructing a narrative, a sequence of events, a legal argument. And though I was not yet fully aware of it, each of those preposterous letters served as a foundational brick in the edifice of the conflict she was intent on igniting, a conflict that commences not with raised voices, but with meticulously penned documents imbued with an unsettling perfume and malevolent intent. By the time the 4th letter had fully transformed to ash in my fireplace, I had presumed Karen had exhausted her repertoire of inventive grievances concerning matters that were unequivocally none of her concern. It transpired, however, that she was merely warming up. The true turning point arrived on a crisp October morning, one of those quintessential Colorado days where the air carries a metallic sharpness and the sky possesses an almost unreal cerulean hue. I was in my workshop, shaping a piece of juniper on the lathe, when I heard the distinctive sound of tires traversing my gravel driveway. This was not the hesitant, uncertain roll of a casual visitor. No, this was the resolute official cadence that announces the arrival of formal documentation. I wiped the sawdust from my hands and stepped outside. My progress halted abruptly. Karen stood at the foot of my steps, clad in a navy blue pantsuit that appeared as though it had never encountered the elements. Beside her stood a young man, likely in his late 20s or early 30s, attired in a suit that seemed slightly ill-fitting, clutching a plain leather briefcase as if it contained volatile material. The young man cleared his throat. "Thomas Edgington?" I responded with a nod. He opened his briefcase with hands that exhibited a slight tremor and produced a slender folder. "You've, been served." He extended it towards me in a manner reminiscent of a zookeeper offering sustenance to a ravenous lion. Karen offered no smile. Her expression conveyed a sense of profound satisfaction, a look sharper than mere amusement, as if she had been anticipating this precise moment. I accepted the folder. "What is this?" "A formal notice," she stated, "from the Blue Haven Ridge Homeowners Association." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not a member of your HOA." "Legally irrelevant," she retorted. And at that precise instant, the truth became unequivocally clear. Karen was not acting out of confusion or petty pique. She was operating with calculated strategic intent. I opened the folder, then and there, on my porch. The initial page presented an official appearance, replete with prominent headings, legalistic terminology, and signatures, detailing a violation summary, the meaning of which remained unclear. However, the subsequent page was where the sheer absurdity truly took flight. It contained a map, not a survey, not a plat, not a document bearing a single verifiable coordinate. It was a screenshot from Google Earth, adorned with haphazard red lines drawn in what could have been either Microsoft Paint or a child's rudimentary crayon. Adjacent to it was a typed declaration. The property known as the Edgington residence encroaches 24 feet into the legally designated lands of the Blue Haven Ridge Association. Encroaches, as if my home had inexplicably sprouted legs and meandered downhill without prior authorization. I looked up at Karen, then back at the map, and then once more at her. "You are accusing me of constructing my residence on your land, on community land?" I inquired. "And we are offering you an opportunity to resolve this amicably," she corrected. "Amicably?" I echoed, my voice devoid of inflection. "And how, pray tell, do you suggest I accomplish that?" She handed me another document, this one highlighted as if for a middle school textbook. It mandated that I cease unauthorized occupation, restore encroached land to community conditions, and submit a proposal for voluntary transfer of improvements. The term improvements, by the way, encompassed my garage, a portion of my workshop's roof, and a significant segment of my home's foundation, amounting to a 6-figure investment. I stared at her. "You believe I built my house on someone else's property?" Her expression radiated unvarnished, polished arrogance. "Oh, not someone else's," she replied. "The community's. And did you not conduct your due diligence prior to leveling an accusation of theft? We conducted a thorough internal review." She presented me with a color printout of the identical, mangled map accompanied by a statement, visual estimation based on updated boundary interpretations. A genuine involuntary laugh escaped me, its echo resonating across the ridge. "Karen," I said, "you have 20 seconds to depart my property before I summon the sheriff." The young man in the ill-fitting suit instinctively took 2 steps back. Karen remained unfazed. "We will be following up shortly," she declared. "You just did," I retorted. "Now leave." She complied, but not before turning back towards the road and raising her voice just enough for the neighbor's security camera to capture it. "You will regret making this difficult." At that moment I did not comprehend it, but those 7 smug words were the very spark that would ignite the fuse for the most consequential land dispute of my entire existence. It was no longer about a mere complaint, a simple misunderstanding, or a homeowners association president with an excessive leisure time. This had escalated into a confrontation with a woman who genuinely believed she could redraw the world with a marker, a map, and an outright falsehood, and she was about to discover that certain lines, particularly those delineating property boundaries, do not shift simply because one desires them to. After Karen departed my porch, accompanied by her thinly veiled smirk and her cheaply hired messenger, I stood there for a considerable time, the absurd collection of papers in my hands. In my 20 years of inspecting federal lands, I had encountered my fair share of flawed maps. However, this was something altogether different. This was sheer incompetence masquerading as legitimate authority, and that, in my experience, is the most perilous form of deception. I placed the documents on my workbench, poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, and opened the top drawer of an old metal filing cabinet. Within resided the artifacts that offered me more solace than any religious text ever could: my original land surveys. While surveyors refer to them as the bones of the earth, I consider them the embodiment of truth. Yet here's the peculiar thing. When presented with a fabricated boundary map, even one as laughably deficient as this, an instinct is triggered. A subtle tension arises beneath the ribs, like a whispered caution urging, check, verify, confirm. And so, I did. Shortly after lunch, I retrieved my handheld GPS unit, an older Trimble model I'd utilized back in the days when the federal government still invested in high-quality equipment, and proceeded towards the southern perimeter of my property. This was not due to any doubt regarding my surveys, but rather a growing suspicion about Karen's underlying intentions. The air was crisp and cold, so pure it felt invigorating. The pine needles underfoot rustled softly as I walked. I followed the ridgeline downwards towards the initial boundary marker, one that had been established 2 decades prior when I finalized the purchase. Almost immediately, the GPS emitted a soft chirp. It was a subtle alert, nothing dramatic. However, for anyone who has extensively used such a device, the distinction between a minor positional fluctuation and a reading that is guiding you astray is readily apparent. I slowed my pace, adjusted my stance, and allowed the instrument to calibrate. Beep, beep, beep. 3 distinct beeps in rapid succession, each growing more insistent as the accuracy zone narrowed. "That's not right," I murmured. The reading was off by approximately 5 feet, perhaps 6. Not a substantial discrepancy, but enough to send a prickle of unease down my spine. Markers do not spontaneously shift. Coordinates do not wander aimlessly. Boundaries are not polite suggestions. They are legally recorded with the county, akin to immutable commandments. I crouched down and gently brushed away a layer of pine needles. There it was, a faint circular impression in the soil, soft and recently filled, not yet compacted by the elements or the passage of time. Someone had deliberately dislodged a boundary pin and then reinserted it in an incorrect location. For a long moment, I simply stared at it, because one does not accidentally displace a boundary marker. It is not like casually plucking a weed. Boundary pins are driven into the earth with the force of nails being hammered into the very spine of the land, intended to remain fixed. However, my investigation did not cease there. I proceeded further along the slope, allowing the GPS to guide me. At intervals of roughly 30 to 40 feet, the device would emit another chirp, each time with a discernible urgency, much like a dog attempting to gain its owner's attention. And then I discovered the second disturbance in the soil, followed by a third. Each represented a small scar upon the earth where a marker had once stood, each displaced by several feet from its rightful position. It was at this juncture that the grim realization fully settled within me. This was not a matter of oversight or carelessness. This was deliberate tampering. Someone, almost certainly acting under Karen's direct instruction, had traversed the boundary line, extracted the pins, and repositioned them to create the deceptive appearance that her property extended beyond its actual limits. And they had not merely adjusted a single marker, they had systematically shifted multiple crucial turning points, those critical junctures where property lines changed direction in accordance with the undulating terrain. A novice would not possess the knowledge to tamper with these specific points. This indicated that detailed instructions had been provided. I stood upon that slope, the cold wind descending from the ridge, and felt a familiar sensation resurface, one I hadn't experienced since my days as a federal official, the rekindling of that old fire, the one that ignited when individuals attempted to subvert the very system I had dedicated my career to upholding. Karen had not merely transgressed a boundary, she had attempted to obliterate it. I meticulously documented each disturbed location with photographs, recorded their precise coordinates, and marked their positions. By the time the sun began its descent behind the towering pines, I had amassed sufficient evidence of these irregularities to confirm one definitive fact. The legal notice she had served upon me was not the opening gambit of her campaign. It was, in fact, her initial attempt at deception, and if she believed a poorly drawn map or a dislodged marker could intimidate me, she was about to gain a profound understanding of the tenacity inherent in a retired land inspector. 2 days after discovering the disturbed markers along my southern slope, the true professionals arrived precisely as scheduled at the break of dawn in 2 pristine white trucks bearing the prominently displayed logo of Rocky Vista Geomatics. If you have ever witnessed a team of surveyors disembark from their vehicles, you will recognize the characteristic demeanor, no nonsense, clad in sturdy boots, coffee in hand, their eyes already surveying the landscape before their feet even touched the ground. These were not mere clipboard strategists like Karen. These were individuals who possessed an innate connection to the land, capable of deciphering the contours of a hillside with the same precision as a physician interprets an X-ray. The crew chief, a man of solid build and broad shoulders, was named Levi. I had collaborated with him a decade prior on a particularly challenging boundary dispute involving a devious developer and 40 acres of inaccurately recorded forest land. Even then, Levi could traverse 6 miles in adverse snowy conditions and maintain the steadiness of a laser receiver with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. He had aged gracefully. "Morning, Tom," he greeted, extending a handshake that conveyed the firm, simple, and respectful acknowledgement of old colleagues. "Got your files? Got your notes? We'll take it from here." That right there is a truly remarkable quality. An authentic expert who requires no theatrics, no prolonged discussions, and no lengthy preliminary meetings to commence their work. Simply provide them with the land and the verifiable facts, and they will meticulously unravel the truth. The men began unloading their specialized equipment, tripods fitted with laser heads, GPS receivers comparable in size to lunchboxes, reflector poles, soil probes, and a drone case containing a LiDAR unit valued at more than my truck. They dispersed across the terrain like a highly coordinated military unit. Each individual understood their precise role, their designated setup location, and the exact angle for their sights. There were no superfluous movements, no idle chatter, only the quiet, harmonious execution of people deeply committed to precision. I afforded them their space. Surveyors prefer an unobstructed view and do not appreciate distractions from behind. From my vantage point on the upper terrace, I observed them moving methodically from marker to marker, meticulously checking depths, examining pins, measuring offsets, and logging coordinates with those precise, almost ritualistic gestures that seem to be the exclusive domain of surveyors. For 3 tranquil hours, the scene unfolded without incident. No drama, only the steady accumulation of data, the silent whispers of truth emanating from the earth. Then, a little before noon, I heard a gentle knock on the workshop door. It was Levi. He wasted no words, as was his custom. "Mind coming with me?" he inquired. We descended the slope together, the crunch of pine needles under our boots accompanying our steps. He stopped at a boundary point adjacent to a decorative shrub line that marked the edge of Karen's property. There, at my feet, lay the original marker from 2 decades prior. It was weathered and aged, precisely where the county records indicated it should be. Levi tapped it lightly with the toe of his boot. "Confirmed by GPS within 1 inch, he stated. "So far so good?" I inquired. He met my gaze with a knowing look. "Not exactly." We proceeded another 20 feet downhill. Levi knelt and carefully pulled back a thick curtain of ivy that had grown over a low-lying rock wall. Beneath it, partially obscured by the soil, as if someone had intentionally concealed it, was another boundary pin. This one was shiny, and undeniably incorrect. Levi pointed to it with the tip of his probe. "Whoever placed this one," he observed, "was off by approximately 30 feet. 30 feet. That's not an accidental misplacement. That's a deliberate act of manipulation." He retrieved his tablet and tapped the screen. A digital overlay materialized, displaying my original recorded boundaries in blue and their newly acquired field data superimposed in red. "Here's where it gets particularly interesting," he remarked. I looked, and a wave of disbelief washed over me. Karen's entire backyard, her expanded patio, her palatial guest house, even the edge of her opulent infinity pool, all of it rested not on her own parcel, but on nearly 8/10 of an acre of my land. Not a mere few inches, not a single foot, not a negligible rounding error, but almost a full acre. I exhaled a long, slow breath through my teeth. "Levi, are you telling me she has constructed nearly $1 million worth of structures on land she does not legally own?" He nodded. "Yep, that's precisely what I'm telling you." "And the shifted markers?" I asked. "5 of them were moved," he replied. "All in a consistent pattern, all repositioned in a direction that benefits her property. That does not occur by chance." I gazed down once more at the overlapping red and blue lines. "She knew," I stated quietly. "Or someone working for her knew. Regardless, intent is clearly evident across the entire hillside." Levi slid his tablet back into its protective case. "I will have the certified report on your desk by tomorrow, fully documented, sealed, and prepared for county review." "I appreciate that," I said. He met my gaze with a long, steady look. "Tom, this situation presents one of the most flagrant instances of property boundary manipulation I've encountered in quite some time. You're not merely dealing with a contentious neighbor, you're up against someone who believes they can arbitrarily reshape reality to suit their whims." I offered a silent affirmation, acknowledging my own apprehensions. Yet truthfully, a small ember within me, a vestige of my days as an inspector, felt something more profound, a flicker of resolve, a sense of grounded purpose, a familiar calling. The land, once merely hinting at its secrets, was now speaking with an undeniable clarity, and I felt compelled to respond. The night after Levi revealed that displaced marker concealed beneath the ivy, sleep eluded me. Having dedicated years to dissecting fraudulent land claims, certain instincts become deeply ingrained. That night, the feeling was unequivocal. This wasn't a simple oversight or a careless error, but a meticulously crafted plot, and every scheme leaves its traces. I simply hadn't anticipated the initial clue appearing in my electronic inbox at 6 o'clock in the morning. The message originated from a gentleman named Greg Porter. The name resonated. He was one of the initial purchasers of property in Blue Haven Ridge. While our interactions had been limited to brief, courteous exchanges over the years, he had always struck me as a man of sound judgment and quiet integrity, someone who understood the wisdom of minding his own affairs. His email commenced with a straightforward plea. "Tom, I believe you need to see this. Please keep my name out of it." Directly beneath this was a video attachment. Upon opening it and increasing the volume, I watched a recording, captured by a backyard surveillance system. The visuals were somewhat indistinct, bathed in the pre-dawn twilight that cast the world in a muted grayish-blue hue. The timestamp indicated 5:48 a.m., dating back 3 months. The footage depicted two individuals clad in landscaping attire slowly traversing the perimeter of Karen's property. They weren't engaged in planting or pruning, nor were they carrying typical gardening implements. One man was holding a lengthy metal rod, while the other carried a small container filled with soil and what appeared to be survey stakes. Though the audio was faint, a single sentence became discernible as the taller of the two men gestured towards the sloping terrain. Shifted a bit further, nobody checks these anyway. I paused the playback. No enhancement, no improved lighting, and certainly no need to identify the faces. The core elements were present, the method, the motive, and now a glimpse of the means. Karen hadn't stumbled upon an accidental boundary error. She had orchestrated a clandestine dawn operation to reposition the markers to her advantage, and in her ambition, she had overlooked a fundamental truth about human nature. There are two types of neighbors: those who respect boundaries and those who meticulously document everything. The morning surprises, however, were not yet concluded. Approximately 8 o'clock, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps on the gravel walkway. Stepping outside, I observed a young man, perhaps 16 or 17, standing somewhat hesitantly near the porch steps, clutching a drone remote. "Sir, are you Mr. Edgington?" I confirmed with a nod. He swallowed audibly. I think I have something you should see." His name was Ben, and he resided a few houses down from Karen's residence. He appeared to be a reserved individual, pale, wearing an oversized hoodie and footwear that seemed to have endured more than their fair share of wear. He extended a thumb drive as if it were an immense burden. "I fly my drone quite a bit," he explained, looking away with a hint of embarrassment. "For school projects, for leisure, sometimes just to capture images of approaching storms over the ridge." I reassured him. "It's all right, son. What did you discover?" He manipulated a few controls on his device and a miniature screen illuminated, displaying a time-lapse sequence compiled from numerous flights. The footage chronicled Karen's backyard over a 2-year span, and what I witnessed caused my jaw to clench. Her swimming pool hadn't materialized overnight. It had expanded incrementally and deliberately. Initially, a concrete foundation appeared, followed by the structural framework, then the deck, subsequently an extension of the patio, and finally another layer of concrete. But the most astonishing revelation was the recurring encroachment. Every few months, the entire structure seemed to inch further towards my property line, akin to a glacial advance, fueled by malicious intent. At one point within the time-lapse, a small retaining wall seemed to emerge almost instantly, followed by another incremental shift a month later. A new flower bed then appeared, conveniently obscuring what must have been one of the crucial marker points. I let out a slow breath. "Ben, this is remarkable. Thank you." He hesitated. "The folks in the HOA kept saying you were the problem, but none of it seemed right." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing." After he departed, I remained standing, the thumb drive in my hand, the morning sun warming the pine needles at my feet. With Greg's video, Ben's time-lapse, and Levi's precise data, the truth was no longer hidden. It was irrefutable, meticulously documented, and corroborated from multiple perspectives. Karen hadn't simply bent the rules. She had attempted to contort the very landscape. As I observed the ridge catching fire in the burgeoning sunlight, I felt a profound internal shift, a sense of settled determination, a familiar strength. The conflict was no longer abstract. It was tangible, and the time for a firm response had arrived. By the time the sun had ascended high enough to cast its warmth across the ridge, I had formulated a clear course of action. My motivation was not driven by anger or pride, but by a far more fundamental, deeply ingrained principle. A boundary represents a commitment, and a broken commitment demands rectification. Returning inside, I settled at my workshop bench with a fresh pot of coffee and opened the steel filing cabinet that had accompanied me through 2 decades of federal service. Within it lay my records, precise, comprehensive, and perhaps mundane to most, but invaluable to those who appreciate the power of meticulous organization. I retrieved the files, spread them across the table, and began. The initial step was to formally lodge an encroachment dispute with the county. This involved submitting Levi's findings, photographic evidence of disturbed marker locations, and the original survey from 2000. The county clerk who answered the phone recognized my name. "Oh, it's you," she remarked, followed by a noticeable pause. "Is this about Karen again?" I blinked in surprise, another brief silence ensuing. "Never mind. What do you require?" That reaction alone was intriguing, a lead I would pursue later. The second step was to draft a cease and desist letter, preparing 2 copies, one addressed directly to Karen and another to the Blue Haven Ridge Homeowners Association as an entity. Both documents, using measured legal language, stipulated that any continued use, expansion, or occupation of the contested territory would be construed as an act of willful trespass. It's astonishing how potent a concise statement can be when accompanied by a signature under penalty of perjury. The third step involved initiating a preliminary claim of adverse possession. In simpler terms, this meant that if no opposing documentation was presented within 30 days, the claim would be entered into the public record as fact. And believe me, HOAs dread paperwork deadlines more than they do non-uniform holiday displays. The fourth step was to securely upload all pertinent information to cloud storage, creating multiple backups across various devices. My 20 years in federal service had instilled a profound respect for evidence, treating it as invaluable treasure. Then came the final, unplanned but necessary task of the morning. There exists a particular brand of arrogance that flourishes in secrecy, in hushed conversations, and in clandestine meetings. Conversely, arrogance utterly detests the light of day. I logged into my Facebook account, a platform I primarily use for sharing images of sunsets and my stubbornly productive tomato plants, and composed a single pointed sentence. If you're going to accuse someone of building on your land, ensure your own house isn't constructed upon theirs. I omitted any names or specific details as they were unnecessary. The local populace possesses a keen ability to discern underlying meanings, especially when property lines are involved. After posting, I closed my laptop and returned to refining the edge of a cedar plank for a table I was crafting. Within 15 minutes, my phone began to buzz. By 20 minutes, it was vibrating across the workbench like a captured insect. Within 30 minutes, the post had garnered hundreds of likes, numerous comments, and several shares from individuals I didn't even know. It appears truth possesses a remarkable velocity when allowed to proceed unimpeded. A woman from the HOA messaged me privately, her apprehension palpable. "Please continue." A man inquired, "Is this related to the pool we all advised her against building?" A resident simply commented, "Oh boy, Bezoa, this is going to be good." Subsequently, someone forwarded me a screenshot of a discussion thread from the private HOA message board. Karen was in a state of complete agitation, accusing individuals of disseminating misinformation, threatening to enforce community regulations, and vowing swift legal repercussions. It was the digital equivalent of watching a kettle boil over in real time. I offered no reply, no update, and refrained from adding fuel to the fire, understanding a fundamental principle that Karen had overlooked. When fabricating falsehoods, noise is your primary weapon. When speaking the truth, silence becomes your most potent tool. Setting aside my tools, I stepped outside, inhaling the crisp Colorado air and listened to the wind rustling through the pines. It was a sound of steadiness, of certainty, of ancient wisdom. The bureaucratic skirmish had commenced, but the true tempest was still on the horizon. My Facebook post had been active for less than a day when the genuine unraveling began. Some contend that the internet has amplified human animosity. While this may hold some truth, it has also ensured that falsehoods travel at a slower pace than verifiable facts. Once the opportune spark ignites dry tinder, by the following morning, the entire county seemed to be aware of the brewing conflict between myself and the Blue Haven Ridge HOA. People at the local hardware store inquired if I had seen the post, and ranchers would halt their trucks on the roadside to remark, We heard you've stirred up a hornet's nest." The most telling indication, however, arrived in the form of a screenshot someone sent me from the HOA message board. Karen was incandescent with rage, her messages a series of lengthy, polished pronouncements of panic. "Disregard the misinformation," she wrote. "Boundary clarifications are internal matters. Unauthorized statements concerning HOA jurisdiction will be addressed legally. Community unity is paramount during this challenging period." Community unity. One might assume she was governing a small nation. In a way, she certainly believed she was. But fear invariably leads to recklessness, and Karen committed her most imprudent act. 2 days later, on a Sunday afternoon, the weather was clear, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine sap. I was in my backyard, tightening a loose hinge on the shed door, when I heard laughter drifting across the ridge. It wasn't ordinary laughter, it was the sound of a crowd. I ascended to the terrace and gazed down towards the disputed boundary, my jaw tightening. Folding chairs, decorative lanterns, a Bluetooth speaker, and a long folding table laden with wine coolers and salads that had clearly never encountered soil. 3 members of the HOA board, attired in pastel polo shirts, and at the epicenter, Karen, sporting a sun hat so expansive it could shade an entire courtroom. They were hosting a barbecue on my land, my disputed land, the land that was currently the subject of an active legal case. As if this display of audacity wasn't sufficient, she had extended invitations to the entire neighborhood, parents, children, individuals I had never encountered. They were sipping white wine and conversing as if attending a casual open house. It was pure spectacle, a calculated performance, a blatant assertion of power. Her unspoken message was clear: "Observe us. We belong here. He does not." I observed in silence for a considerable moment. I refrained from shouting, from storming down there, from escalating the situation, recognizing that sometimes the most effective strategy is to allow individuals to reveal their true nature to the world. I retreated inside, retrieved my phone, and dialed the sheriff's department. "Sheriff's line. This is Deputy Mills." A calm voice responded. "Good afternoon," I replied. "I wish to report an unauthorized gathering on private property currently involved in an active encroachment dispute." There was a brief pause. "Oh, is this regarding Blue Haven Ridge?" "Affirmative," I confirmed. "We'll dispatch a unit." I expressed my gratitude and terminated the call, then returned to the terrace. What I hadn't anticipated was the live stream. Apparently, one of the residents had decided to broadcast the entire barbecue on Facebook, titling it HOA vs. Land Guy Grill Edition. By the time the sheriff's SUVs arrived approximately 40 minutes later, the live stream had amassed over 1,000 viewers. Spectators in the comments section were taking sides as if it were the Super Bowl. I leaned against the railing and observed the unfolding events. 2 deputies approached Karen. One could almost perceive the annoyance radiating from her like heat waves off asphalt. She lifted her chin. "We are holding a community event on HOA-managed property," she declared, her voice loud enough to be captured by every camera present. The deputy held up a tablet displaying a luminous county parcel map. "No, ma'am. According to the recorded boundaries, this area is not HOA property." A gasp emanated from someone near the grill, while another muttered, "I told her so." Karen's facial expression twitched. "We possess documentation." The deputy's tone remained even. "Ma'am, until this dispute is resolved, this land is under legal review. You and your guests need to step back across the boundary." Her sun hat wobbled. She gestured towards the assembled guests. "Everyone remain where you are. This is false information." The deputy spoke with the practiced patience of someone who had witnessed every variation of suburban drama. "I will ask again. Please step back." When she still did not comply, a second deputy joined him. Together, they gently but firmly guided her a few steps uphill, clearly across the established line. A moment of eerie silence followed. Then, the live stream chat erupted. "OMG, this is wild. She's losing it. Is she serious right now? Tom was right. This is embarrassing." I offered no smile, no gloating. However, I did perceive a shift, not within myself, but within the community, among the neighbors. A foundation cracks long before a structure collapses. This was her crack. As guests began to pack their chairs and plastic wine cups, one man loudly remarked, "I told her this was a terrible idea." Another woman shook her head in embarrassment, ushering her children back towards the trail. Karen stood alone for a moment, her shoulders rigid, her face flushed and trembling, before snapping at someone off camera, "This isn't over, not by a long shot." And to her credit, she was correct. This was not the end. However, she had inadvertently transformed the county, the internet, and a significant portion of her own neighborhood into witnesses. She had accomplished the one thing I hadn't anticipated. She had effectively proven my case for me, live on camera, complete with a sun hat and a barbecue. As the last of the guests dispersed, leaving behind a scattering of forgotten napkins fluttering in the breeze, I grasped a crucial realization. Karen was no longer contending for land. She was fighting for control, for her public image, for her perceived dominion. This meant the subsequent confrontation would not occur on a hillside or at a social gathering, but within the confines of a courtroom, and I already possessed the truth firmly on my side. The morning of the hearing felt unusually chilly, perhaps due to the autumn wind descending from the book cliffs, or perhaps it was simply the accumulated weight of all that had transpired to reach this juncture. Upon entering the courthouse, the room was already densely populated. Neighbors from Blue Haven Ridge, local journalists, zoning interns clutching clipboards, and a smattering of individuals merely seeking to witness a confrontation. I entered not with anger, but with thorough preparation. Across the aisle, Karen made her entrance, mirroring her approach to life, ostentatiously, yet wordlessly. A white blazer adorned her frame, her hair lacquered with a stiffness that suggested it could withstand a hurricane. Her lips pursed, as if the entire assembly were beneath her notice. Her attorney resembled a man desperately wishing for a time machine. Judge Beatrice Loon assumed the bench, a woman whose demeanor indicated decades of navigating absurdity and an intolerance for any further displays of it. She reviewed the case summary, the claims, and the submitted filings, then gestured for Karen's attorney to commence. He stood, adjusted his cuffs, and launched into his performance-polished, articulate, yet hollow. He implicated the developer, pointed to inconsistencies in mapping, cited clerical errors, suggested shifting markers, and alluded to misinterpretations. He attributed blame to every conceivable factor except the woman seated 3 feet behind him. He asserted that Karen had acted in good faith and implied the entire affair was a regrettable misunderstanding that I had unnecessarily escalated. He then resumed his seat, adjusting his tie as if he had just delivered a momentous speech. When my turn arrived, I eschewed oration. Instead, I presented the judge with the original survey from 2000, followed by the independent GPS survey from Rocky, Vista Geomatics, then the geospatial overlays, drone footage, photographic evidence, county records, correspondence, cease and desist orders, and the HOA archive log, which clearly indicated Karen had accessed the official survey months prior to accusing me of trespassing. Each document was pristine, officially stamped, notarized, and irrefutable. The judge examined them slowly, with the meticulousness of a jeweler appraising a diamond, turning each one to inspect its edges for imperfections. She paused when she reached the overlay where Levi had precisely superimposed the blue and red boundary lines. A full 8 acres, encompassing Karen's opulent residence, pool, patio, and guest house, were unequivocally situated on my property. Then came the voicemail. Karen's own voice, sharp and distinctly irritated, filled the courtroom. "Just keep applying pressure on him," she instructed. "He'll fold. That land isn't worth much. He's just being difficult." The silence was so profound, one could have heard a pin drop. Her attorney lodged an objection, which the judge promptly dismissed. Karen stared fixedly at the table, her jaw clenched with enough force to fracture enamel. Subsequently, the county inspector testified. His demeanor was calm, neutral, and devastatingly effective. He confirmed that the guest house had been granted an illegal permit as a tool shed, the patio lacked any permit whatsoever, and the pool had been approved based on an erroneous assumption of the boundary lines. A zoning officer, who had recently resigned, had expedited the paperwork without conducting adequate due diligence. As he concluded his testimony, the judge folded her hands and addressed Karen directly. She then delivered a ruling so cold, so precise, it felt akin to observing a surgeon performing a clean amputation. "Karen," she stated, "knowingly constructed structures on my land. Karen knowingly disregarded official surveys in her possession. Karen knowingly utilized falsified materials to exert pressure on a neighboring landowner." Her voice remained steady, but each word carried the imposing weight of the mountain range visible beyond the courthouse. The verdict followed. Karen was not merely asked but formally ordered to demolish every structure encroaching upon my property. This included the pool, the patio, the outdoor kitchen, and the guest house, every tile, every pipe, every concrete element she had so proudly showcased to prospective buyers. She was mandated to restore the land to its original contour, remove all debris at her own expense, submit to oversight of the demolition plan, and pay $800,000 in damages, legal fees, and punitive penalties. Furthermore, the Blue Haven Ridge HOA was placed under external audit for 1 year due to egregious governance failures. As the gavel fell, a palpable shockwave rippled through the room. A whisper of "holy hell" could be heard, followed by another murmur of "she's finished." Karen did not once look in my direction. She remained frozen, a statue sculpted from pure denial. Outside, reporters surrounded me. My response was concise. I simply wanted my land to be respected. That is all. I then descended the courthouse steps into the crisp Colorado air, fully aware of a significant truth. The legal battle had concluded, but its repercussions were only just beginning. The weeks following the verdict arrived with the slow, then sudden intensity of winter storms in this region. Karen retreated into silence. This was not the quietude of dignity or acceptance, but the hushed stillness of someone who realizes the world has turned its back and the ground beneath them is beginning to crumble. The demolition order struck her with the force of a sledgehammer. The cost of removing the pool alone would exceed $100,000, the patio another $50,000. The guest house, with its plumbing, electrical systems, and concrete foundations, represented substantial expenses. Selling the property was impossible, burdened by an active demolition mandate hanging over it like a curse. Contractors quoted figures that would make even a wealthy individual sweat. Karen, however, was not genuinely affluent. She merely projected that image. Rumors circulated along the ridge that she had exhausted every avenue, from negotiation and pleading to making clandestine calls to contacts no one could precisely identify. But the law operates as a relentless machine, and by then it had already begun its inexorable process. Once a judge mandates a demolition, the passage of time continues relentlessly, even as a person's world crumbles. The Homeowners Association offered no assistance. Their focus had shifted entirely to navigating their own internal review, prioritizing distance from the individual who had entangled them in a bureaucratic quagmire. Weeks bled into one another. 30 days, then 40, then 50. By the 63rd day, Karen officially defaulted. The demolition bills arrived, yet she did not acknowledge them. When penalties for late payment were added, she ignored the calls. When the county's lien notice appeared, it was the HOA president, her replacement, who discovered it discarded by her entryway. Subsequently, the bank intervened. The mortgage went unpaid, liens accumulated, demolition expenses mounted, damages owed to me were pending, permits were suspended, and the property's title was legally contested. No prudent buyer would consider acquiring that residence. Consequently, the bank proceeded with its standard protocol. They initiated foreclosure. On a crisp morning, a notice was posted at the periphery of Blue Haven Ridge. It was a simple printed document affixed to the HOA's bulletin board, much like a flyer seeking a lost pet. Foreclosure auction, public sale. The date was October 14th. The venue, Mesa County Courthouse. The property identified as 1 and 12 Falling Leaf Drive. its condition as is. Two words that signified a complete devastation. Arriving early on the auction day, I drove into town, partly fueled by curiosity, partly by an emotion I couldn't quite define. The courthouse parking area was largely deserted, save for 3 pickup trucks, a car with California license plates, and a county vehicle. Inside the auction room was even more sparse. A young bank representative sat with a laptop, his pen tapping rhythmically against a clipboard. In the rear, 2 men in flannel shirts conversed in hushed tones, likely speculators hoping for a bargain until they noticed the demolition order attached to the property's file. They departed before the bidding commenced. A woman, her shoulder draped with a scarf, perused the documents, murmured, "Absolutely not," and then vanished. As the clock struck 10, only 2 registered bidders remained. Myself and a gentleman who owned a local landscaping enterprise, the sort of individual who might acquire a dilapidated property solely to salvage its components. The bank representative cleared his throat and began reciting the legal description of the land parcel, a process that occupied nearly 3 full minutes. The HOA had never simplified any process. The initial bid was set at $75,000. The landscaper stroked his chin, then shook his head. A property slated for demolition, burdened with liens, not a worthwhile investment. He did not raise his hand. The room fell silent. I raised mine. The banker's eyes widened, visibly relieved to have at least one participant. 75,000. Do I hear 80? No response. 75? Going once. Silence. Twice. I extended a finger. 76. He nodded promptly, bidding at 76. The landscaper paused for a mere half-second, glanced at me, then at the file, before muttering, "All yours, buddy," and exiting. The banker, barely concealing his relief, declared, "Sold. 76,000. Congratulations, Mr. Edgington." I completed the necessary paperwork with composure, yet internally a profound shift occurred. It wasn't triumph, nor was it vengeance. It was something more solid, akin to the final piece of a complex puzzle slotting perfectly into place. This was not a celebratory victory lap, but rather a reclamation. You see, the entire estate, encompassing Karen's residence, the land it occupied, and the structures that were a mixture of legitimate and fraudulent, presented a formidable challenge for anyone else. The permits were a chaotic mess. The demolition directive remained in effect. The property lines were ambiguous, but for me, it represented the sole parcel of land on earth that I understood intimately, down to the last blade of grass. I harbored no fear of the documentation. I embodied it. By the time I exited the courthouse, a gust of wind had begun to stir, sweeping dry leaves across the steps. I paused for a moment, observing their swirling dance. Life possesses a peculiar quality, doesn't it? At times, it dismantles things to allow for the emergence of something superior. I did not return directly home. Instead, I drove to the ridge, pulling up in front of Karen's former mansion, and gazed at the very spot where she had hosted her wine gatherings, the patio that wasn't hers, the pool she had boasted about, the guest house she had marketed as luxurious accommodations, all of it now empty, all of it silent. Her ostentatious SUV was gone. Her potted plants withered. The mailbox overflowed with correspondence she never opened. A dwelling erected on another's property inevitably concludes in such a manner. It belongs to me now. Yet I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not even enter. I simply observed it and inhaled deeply, allowing the moment to fully register. For the first time in my existence, I comprehended something about justice. It does not always arrive swiftly. It certainly does not arrive elegantly. But when it does manifest, it does so completely. And my work was far from finished. I harbored intentions for this locale, ambitious ones, plans that bore no connection to Karen and everything to do with those individuals who genuinely merited a second opportunity. The storm had subsided. Now it was time to construct something that warranted this tranquility. The day I took ownership of the property, the initial aspect that registered was not the house itself. It was the stillness. Not the uneasy quietude associated with conflict or tension, but something more profound, something pure, a sort of calm that descends after a tempest has passed and the atmosphere finally recalls the sensation of peace. Over the subsequent 3 weeks, demolition crews arrived and departed. Jackhammers, backhoes, and dump trucks traversed the ridge. They dismantled the swimming pool, the patio, and the foundations of the guest house. They stripped everything back until the earth appeared raw and authentic once more, like a wound healing in its own measured rhythm. I did not actively supervise their efforts extensively. Each morning, I merely walked the perimeter with a thermos of coffee, acknowledging the crews with a nod, observing the land revert to the form it should have eternally possessed. Once the demolition debris had been removed, I contacted an old comrade, Jack Trujillo. Jack had served alongside some of the most formidable individuals I'd ever encountered, men possessing keen intellect, unwavering stability, and a quiet fortitude. Following his military service, he established a non-profit organization dedicated to assisting combat veterans in their transition to civilian life. This wasn't about therapy or treatment, it was about providing a space to decompress and rediscover how to simply breathe again. Years prior, during a casual conversation over a beer, I had introduced an idea. What if there existed a sanctuary, a genuine physical space, tranquil and private, a place that didn't feel clinical? Jack had been enthusiastic about the concept, but such locations do not materialize spontaneously. Now I possessed one. "Jack," I stated when he answered the phone, "I believe we are ready to revisit that project." He did not hesitate for long. "You finally secured the land." "Indeed," I confirmed. "And the house that accompanies it, that too," I added after a brief pause. He then replied, "I'll assemble the team." They arrived equipped with a van laden with tools, a truck brimming with lumber, and that silent, resolute demeanor that veterans carry as a second skin. For the ensuing months, the ridge resonated with the sounds of hammers, power drills, saws, and laughter, the kind of mirth that men often don't realize they've missed. We removed the garish pergola and the gaudy light fixtures. We reconfigured the guest rooms into compact, comfortable living spaces. We constructed soundproof quiet rooms for those who required a sanctuary for introspection. We installed blackout blinds, a cozy library nook, and a spacious kitchen where individuals could prepare meals together if they desired. Outdoors, we covered the former pool pit, reinforced it, and transformed it into a rooftop garden, complete with planter boxes and a central fire pit. In the evenings, we would gather there beneath the vast, star-studded, and humbling Colorado sky. The ridge extended broadly in the distance, the land exhaling its slow, ancient breath. This was not merely construction, it was a metamorphosis, not of the dwelling, but of its purpose. The initial 5 veterans arrived on a Friday. One was a Marine who struggled to sleep for more than 2 consecutive hours. Another, an Army medic, kept his phone alarm set for emergencies that would never materialize. A Navy gunner's mate had not experienced a quiet room in years without feeling ensnared by the silence. 2 others remained reticent initially, simply traversing the property with deliberate steps, their shoulders gradually lowering. They required no elaborate speeches. They needed no stringent regulations. They simply needed a place that felt secure and constant. The moment they stepped inside, I sensed a palpable shift. A feeling I hadn't experienced since I began constructing my own residence on that mountain. The land was being utilized for a noble cause. One evening, approximately a week after the first contingent had settled in, I stood on the upper terrace as the sky transitioned to a golden hue. Jack approached and stood beside me, hands in his pockets, gazing out at the distant ridgeline. He remained silent for a considerable duration. The older one becomes, the more one realizes that silence often communicates more effectively than words. Finally, he exhaled. "You know," he remarked, "places like this don't simply materialize, they are created." He gestured toward the house, where warm light emanated from the windows. "And this one? This one will save lives." I had little to offer in response. None was needed. I simply felt the truth of his statement resonate within me, a sensation both weighty and gentle. The sun descended lower, casting an amber glow upon the land, a spectacle that Colorado presents with unparalleled mastery. Below, one of the veterans was tending to the fire pit, coaxing a flame into existence. Two others were bringing chairs to join him. Another individual sat alone at the far edge of the terrace, gazing toward the horizon as if finally allowing himself to believe in something once more. Observing them, I grasped a realization that had taken me over 50 years to attain. Peace is not the absence of adversity, it is the presence of purpose. The ridge was quiet, but not an empty quiet. It was a full quiet, a quiet that had been earned. Jack placed a hand on my shoulder once, a gesture of camaraderie shared between old friends when words prove insufficient. "You reclaimed a place that never truly possessed a soul," he stated softly, "and then you imbued it with one." I remained there for some time after he returned inside, letting the gentle breeze wash over me, listening to the subdued sounds emanating from the house behind me, the laughter, the footsteps, the distant crackling of the fire. All of it was built upon land that was finally, unequivocally, and rightfully mine. Yet it was the purpose burgeoning on that land that held greater significance now. The storm had passed. The clamor had faded. What remained was a form of peace upon which a person could stand firm, steady, and genuine. And as the last rays of light disappeared behind the mountains, I felt a profound sense of settled contentment deep within me. I had battled for my land, but ultimately the land bestowed something in return, something that justified every moment of the struggle, something that promised every mile of quiet ahead.